Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thank you for joining us for the first episode of our new politics show. Of course, there is only one topic to start with today, and that's Brexit. With the government in crisis and just days until a crunch vote in the House of Commons, uncertainty on the issue continues to mount. For today's show, I'm delighted to be joined by Leave campaigner and Conservative Party voter Harsimrat Kaur and Senior Policy Advisor and People's Vote campaigner Randeep Singh. First, thank you both for joining us today. Just days until that crunch vote in the House of Commons. Day by day, it seems like more people are objecting to what Theresa May has put forward. Is that deal going to pass through Parliament?
I'm not in the game of figuring out what's going to pass through Parliament or not. Parliament's a unique place where even if you think that the whole country is behind you, politicians can do something very different. If I was a politician, I'd probably vote against it and I wouldn't let it pass through, but we'll have to see what happens.
And Randeep, what are your views? Will that deal pass through Parliament on Tuesday?
I'm in the same camp as Harsimrat on this. Although I don't think the likelihood is it won't pass, but it'll be really close. I think the government is probably expecting a defeat, but don't want it to be so significant that there's no way back for them. And there's all sorts of kind of amendments being put forward now, and they obviously have to be chosen to be debated on. But I think they're going to lose this vote and then kind of gear up for the next one.
And Harsimrat, do you believe that the fear of a no-deal scenario could actually spur some MPs to back Theresa May's deal, despite not actually fully supporting what's in it?
I think we're in a curious situation where we're kind of right back to where we started, where David Cameron said, if we can't get powers back from Brussels, then we'll go to a referendum. And that's exactly the same tactic that Theresa May is using. She's saying, if we can't get the right deal, we'll go for a no deal. But actually, neither of them were strong enough to actually take that step for either an actual vote and saying, actually, this deal isn't good enough. And same again with Theresa May. She's not strong enough to say this deal isn't good enough. So I don't think that's a fear of having a no deal Brexit. I think people are kind of thinking, okay, this isn't a good deal. What's the next step? Let's find a way to get a better deal.
Do you think there's a realistic possibility of getting a no deal, Randeep?
I think I'm really supporting the amendments being put forward for Tuesday, which basically which will kind of completely take no deal off the table. The issue that I have a bit of concern with is that this kind of idea that no deal will kind of be all brilliant and kind of fantastic for the economy. Everyone, even the government, admits that it's going to be worse off. And if the irony is that Theresa May used that as a tactic through kind of up to June, July, when Shecker's deal was announced, where, you know, we're happy to walk away, no deal is better than a bad deal. And now they've changed kind of gear. Now it's kind of, it's my deal, no deal is kind of the most, you know, terrible thing ever, which I agree with. But, you know, you've convinced the public into kind of believing that no deal is such an amazing thing, and now you're trying to switch them back to the other side. I think they want to find it really difficult.
And she's obviously facing the battle of her life. She's seen ministers resign and even lost the support of MPs she probably thought that she could count on. Do you believe that MPs, especially in the Conservative Party, who don't back a deal, are actually blocking democracy?
No, I think that politicians are there to debate and to stand up for what they believe in. Like, even us as individuals, we have the right to go to our MP and say, you voted this way and we don't agree with that. So actually go back and do, or convince me otherwise. And I think that's exactly what politicians are doing. They're not blocking democracy. They have concerns about the deal, and rightly so. So they're actually saying, actually, convince us otherwise. Tell us why. Give us the opposite opinion. Give us more reasons, more stats, more facts to back your position, and then we'll make an informed decision, because that's exactly what the public want. They want informed decisions.
And your views on that, Randy?
No, I agree that we live in a representative democracy, and we elect politicians, so hopefully they're smarter than us and kind of make more intelligent decisions than us. And if they, and it's only right that they kind of scrutinise government decisions, government deals, and I think that's right.
It's obviously a hefty document, the deal that has been put forward, Randeep. Have you had time to sort of go through any aspects of it, and what do you believe that it does offer? Any particular points which stand out for you?
I haven't read it all myself, but I read quite a lot of commentary on it.
Yeah.
And the kind of key things are, which kind of go against what Brexiteers don't like about is, the fact that EU migrants, until we actually leave, so even during the transition period, anyone from the EU can come to the UK, and then after, so when we finally eventually do leave after transition, they can still get settler status here. We'll have to pay £39 billion as a kind of to cover our commitments into the EU budget, on foreign policy, on state aid rules, all that sort of stuff will still be in place. So I think where I go back to is this deal a better option than our existing position? And the answer is no. You can ask anyone, the answer is no. So it kind of begs the question, why are we doing it? And so for that reason, I think the deal isn't going to move, and particularly, obviously, the kind of catchphrase in Westminster, backstop, this whole thing about Northern Ireland, backstop is basically, just to kind of tell the viewers, it's kind of a bit of like an insurance policy to say, hey, worst comes to us, if we can't agree a deal in 2020 or 2022, if we get a transition extension, is to say, we won't put a hard border on Northern Ireland, we'll kind of keep Northern Ireland within the customs kind of arrangement, so goods can go back and forth. But the DUP, the Northern Irish Party, don't like that because they see that as kind of carving off Northern Ireland to the rest of Great Britain. And we know now that the UK can't leave that kind of insurance policy on its own. It needs to be an agreed position with the EU. So indefinitely, we could be stuck in that indefinitely. And although I call it insurance policy, and that kind of sounds like, oh yeah, everything will be fine, we've got something to fall back on. Actually, if you read the backstop, kind of the insurance policy detail, it says the bare minimum, kind of, so food up to like 5% can cross the border without checks, rest still need to be checked. Great Britain foods agriculture going into Northern Ireland will need to be checked, more so than what is done at the moment. Lorries, there's like this quarters on lorries. There's like over 1 million lorries cross the channel every year, and there's only a certain percentage that will be allowed under the insurance policy. So, don't be fooled. Oh, we'll have something to fall back on. It's bare bone.
Do you challenge any of those views that Randeep has put forward?
I think, to be fair, no, it's a good summary of the document, and it is a really hefty document. I think it goes back to the point of what is a good deal for Great Britain and Great Britain as a whole. So what I admired about Theresa May, and admire in a loose term, when she started this kind of debate, was she brought people from Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and England together to the same table and said, you know what, we're going to get a deal that's going to basically look after the whole of Great Britain, all of our 4 countries, if you say, alone. But then as the process has gone along, she's kind of forgotten that. And yet this backstop idea with Northern Ireland, it's not the greatest. She's kind of forgotten the commitment Scotland also needs from Europe. And because of that, the question now is this a good enough deal for Great Britain? And I guess that's what the politicians need to debate next week. Yeah. Or throughout this week and next week.
Yeah. If we take our minds back to that EU referendum campaign ahead of the 2016 vote, there's a lot of rhetoric, sometimes quite alarming rhetoric, going around at the time. Do you believe that people truly knew what they were voting for?
I think when it comes to any vote, the people are always in 2 camps. There'll be the people who follow the newspaper, follow the news, follow the commentary, and they will get a gist of where they want to go, and depending on what the big news is at that time. And then you've got the other people who kind of are, I don't want to say stuck in their ways, but people who will always vote the way that either their party votes, or their parents vote, or their family votes, or their community votes. So I think if you're in that second bucket where you will vote the way, I guess, your group votes, you didn't know what you were voting for. You were kind of following the crowd. If you're in that other bucket where you were like, actually, this is a once-in-a-lifetime vote, I want to figure out where I stand on this issue, then you knew what you were voting for. Unfortunately, I think a lot of people kind of in that second bucket, and it's a gut feel.
Randeep, did people know what they were voting for ahead of the 2016 vote?
Simple answer is no. And I can give you a very typical example, which is one of my friends worked in our local polling station, and he had elderly aunties and uncles asking him, which one's Labour?
Okay.
Because this is the kind of one of the issues I take, especially with the kind of within the Asian community, is that not much attention was paid to kind of educate people as to what's going on. And it seems like the Asian communities, especially our community, live in this bubble where, oh, EU is this far off kind of thing, and this whole debate is nothing to do with us. And he obviously couldn't say anything because as an officer at the polling station, you can't interfere with someone's voting intention. And so that's where you got loads of, especially within kind of like South or Ealing area, you got loads of people who kind of sport their ballot paper because they really know what they were doing. Because obviously most of them look for a rose or some kind of indication, okay, this is the Labour Party. And even if you look at the bus that went around, the Leave bus, it was red. So kind of that reinforced that kind of message, oh, hang on, is it Labour who's kind of supporting Leave? So there's kind of that, I think, a misjudgment. But I think you can't look at the Brexit vote on its own. You have to look at the last 30, 40 years, what's been going on. There's been a build-up of rhetoric against immigrants, mostly by the right-wing media. And for the last 30 years, Conservatives and the Labour Party governments have blamed the EU for something. And if you look at the kind of newspaper, like The Sun or the Daily Mail, there's always an anti-EU stance, or there's a boogeyman. He's always kind of enforcing rules on us, is doing all sorts of stuff to us. And so then when it came to the vote, people had that kind of unconscious bias saying, I don't really need to know more about the EU because I know all of this bad stuff. Why should I kind of go out and find out all the good stuff? And I know this is a long answer, but the other thing is this idea that Brexit, people voted for Brexit because of the EU. Yeah. I take concern with that as well, issue with that, because I think we have to understand what is the times that we're living in. We're living in times where there's massive poverty in this country. The inequality gap is over 50%. We've got, so out of the Western European countries, cities-wise, 10 of the most poorest, 7 are in the UK, in England. We've got, I don't know, you must have saw the news from the UN, who kind of say that austerity is kind of creates massive grievance and kind of grief to the UK people. You've got the Joseph Rowntree Trust, who've kind of come out and said 9 in every 30 children in a class are living in poverty. You've got 14 million people living in poverty. 4 million of them are actually working. So people are working, but they're still in poverty. And that's why you have all these food banks, people going to them and saying, well, I still work, but I still got to go to a food bank to get food and put food on the table. So it's all of those kind of things, and it kind of builds up, and people think, you know, I'm not kind of valued. I'm stuck in this kind of, my destiny is pre-planned for me depending on where I live. If you live in the north, you're more likely to stay where you are. There's not much social mobility. And I think all of that as a backdrop, people thought, okay, I want to kick things up. I want to kind of change stuff. And you hear this back with the referendum and the kind of analysis that followed about, we're trying to kind of kick the metropolitan elite, kind of showing them, you know, that we exist. Yeah. So I think all of that kind of fed into it quite a lot. And Brexit was just the opportunity, a binary choice to kind of say, do you want to let them know that you're frustrated, you're angry about being left behind, about being squeezed out? And people said, yes, I want to take that opportunity.
I know you touched on immigration there. Harsimrat, in these times of austerity where cuts are taking place left, right and centre, people obviously struggling to make ends meet, do you think immigrants are sometimes seen as a bit of an easy target and are blamed by people in society?
I don't think they're blamed. I think they're misunderstood, both by politicians and the common person. Like, we see someone of colour and we automatically assume that they're an immigrant. Putting Brexit aside for a second, when I'm campaigning for the party, I knock on doors day in, day out, and sometimes I get a lot of abuse just because of the colour of my skin, and yet I'm bred and born in Britain. And it's a common misconception. And the thing with immigrants is, even if you're a white immigrant, people think you're automatically allowed in this country. You are accepted in this country. And I think that's the rhetoric we need to change. We need to, or I say we as in individuals, but also politicians, they need to change that. Immigrants doesn't mean the colour of your skin. It's about your status here. And as long as you're contributing to the society and contributing to the country, you should be allowed here. And you should be allowed here on a fair system, not the system that we currently have.
And Randeep, how do you believe that we can actually unify communities and people from all faith groups in these times of division?
I That's a really quick question. I think it has to start from the top. I think you can't have senior ministers come out and say that Muslim women who choose to wear the hijab or the niqab look like bank robbers, look like letterboxes and stuff like that. I think that's really kind of, that really sets a tone, allows people to kind of say, okay, he's saying it. So if I'm a parent and I've got a 10-year-old, I've got a 13-year-old, and I'm kind of always being conscious about what the language they're using, how they're treating their friends. How do I kind of justify, so you can't do that, when a senior politician who's well liked comes out and says all this sort of stuff openly, almost giving people a permission to say, yeah, it's fine to think like this. And fine, if you want to start a debate, you can kind of choose a certain kind of parameters and say, okay, this is what we're going to debate about, and that's different. But to kind of be explosive on purpose, just to kind of get your message out, I think that's really bad. But just to touch on the immigration point, because I think you mentioned there was a brilliant report done by the Migration Action Committee, which was set up by the previous Home Secretary, to look at, so they did a report, so she commissioned to do a report on what are the impacts of European migrants on the UK. And they came out, I've only got the summary page, but there's literally no evidence whatsoever of any negative impact. So there's no evidence on migrants reducing the employment opportunities of UK-born people, no evidence of European migrants reducing wages of UK-born workers. They have a positive impact on productivity. No evidence of reducing training opportunities for UK people. They found that the Europeans pay more in taxes than the UK, £2,300 on average. And I'm just blurting stats, but I think they're really important. So in 2016, the net contribution was £19 billion to the Exchequer. No kind of negative impact on the NHS. Actually, you'll probably be, there's more of them working in NHS than them using them. I think the stats were something like 1 in 12 doctors is European, 1 in 10 nurses is a European. They don't use social care here. They actually outperform. They found that they outperform English-born children at school, and they don't reduce the education attainment of the children and stuff like that. And the main thing, which I think was a big kind of concern, especially amongst our community, which I kind of find ironic, because the things you hear is, oh, immigrants increase crime, which is totally wrong, because this report found that there's no link whatsoever. And then I kind of look back 50 years ago when our grandfathers and grandmothers came here. They felt the same kind of discrimination then. Oh, these guys commit crime. They're kind of undercutting us in wages. They're stealing our jobs. But you know, we're looking back, and so we should kind of think, hang on, no, not in our name.
No.
Although we're kind of reborn here and we're kind of settled here, migrants are welcome here because we came here. We still do. Our grandparents did the same thing. And I think we should kind of be a bit more open about that. And going back to your question, sorry, was, it starts from the top. But as a community, we need to be kind of standing up. So if Polish shops are being vandalized because some people think it's okay to go back to your country, on that we should stand with them.
Yeah.
If Islamophobia is increasing, we should be standing with our with the Muslim community and saying that's not right. And us being visible Sikhs, being a very visible religion. Going back to your point about immigration, isn't just, no one thinks about the white kind of community as immigrants, but it's going to be the people who are brown or black, they're the ones who are going to be targeted. Yeah. And wearing turbans makes us a kind of, a big target. And you saw the petrol bomb attack in Scotland, which by far right activists. So I think it needs to start from the top. I think the government has been too soft on this. I don't know if you agree, but there's kind of this whole thing about, so the government in their mind connected the far right with people who voted Brexit and said, okay, we can't, so 52% automatically became these kind of far right, we hate immigrants, which in their eyes. And so they've always been a bit soft and kind of not wanted to kind of crack too many eggshells with them and kind of just walk around them and tiptoe, trying to appease these kind of UKIP kind of far right voters back into their party. And they kind of left that ground unguarded, and kind of that's allowed far right activists to kind of get a foot in and kind of have their space to kind of and they've got leverage now which they're using
I
successfully.
challenge that last bit though. I don't think the UKIP voters are from either party. I think they were people who were generally disengaged with politics and who probably would have either not voted, spoilt their ballot, or gone something like Lib Dem, Green, something, basically a smaller party. They didn't, like, if you look at the numbers and the way that the voters flowed through, I guess, the last 2 general elections and the Brexit referendum, they didn't come from one party or another. In fact, actually, majority of them came from Labour because they were disinterested in what that was. So I think when you talk about immigration and being blamed, and even the report that you just mentioned, 100% agree, immigrants are not a negative impact on the UK. But what is a negative impact in the UK is having one set of rules for European migrants and immigrants coming to this country and having another set of rules for everyone else outside of that. And this is the core thing that Vote Leave kind of stood on. And I think if Vote Leave didn't win the battle to kind of become the official Leave campaign, we would have seen a very different vote and probably a very different result as well. But because Vote Leave won and they said, you know what, these are our 3 mantras. We want to control our borders and make sure that people who are coming here, it's on fair immigration. So it doesn't matter whether you're a doctor from Europe or a doctor from India or Asia or America, everyone comes on the same basis, they get all same treatment. I think that's fair. Even as Gursikhs, when we talk about Sikh values, we believe in equality. So that's a done deal. We want people to be, or us to be in control of our money. So we don't want to be just giving out money to the European Union and then have no say over where it goes. And we want to be in control of our laws. We don't want Europe to tell us what laws we have to implement to this country. So in terms of where we have gone, where we're going, I think the Leave campaign was very clear in terms of 3 things. This is what we're voting for. And it was hammered and hammered. And if you ask anyone, they will mention one of those 3 things about the Leave campaign.
Very interesting debate and points raised so far, but we are going to have to take a quick break, and I've been speaking to the public about this issue today, so let's go and see what they have had to say. We're here at Smedit Gurdwara, and we're going to speak to a few people to see what they have to say about Brexit. ਤੁਹਾਡਾ view ਕੀ ਆ Brexit ਤੇ?
Brexit ਦਾ ਇਹ ਆ ਜੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਹੁਣ ਸਾਰੀਆਂ ਕੰਟਰੀਆਂ ਨਾਲ ਮਿਲ ਕੇ ਰਹੀਏ ਤਾਂ ਵਧੀਆ ਗੁੱਡੇ ਆ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਸਾਰੇ ਆਉਂਦੇ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਰਹਿਣ ਇਦਾਂ ਹੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਵੀ ਇਦਾਂ ਹੀ ਇਸ ਕੰਟਰੀ 'ਚ ਆਏ ਆ ਯੂਰਪ ਵੀ ਸਾਰਾ ਆਪਣਾ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਮਿਲ ਕੇ ਬਿਜ਼ਨਸ ਹੋਣਾ ਹੋਊਗਾ ਸਾਰਾ ਕੁਝ ਈਜੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੇ ਕੰਮ ਕਰਦੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਆ ਕੇ ਇੱਥੇ ਕਿਹੜਾ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਮਾੜੇ ਚੰਗੇ ਤਾਂ ਹਰੇਕ ਕੰਟਰੀਆਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੈਗੀ ਭਾਜੀ ਇਕਨੋਮੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਡਾਊਨ ਜਾਣੀ ਹੈ ਜੇ ਕਿਤੇ ਯੂਰਪ ਨੂੰ ਅਲੱਗ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਤੇ ਬਿਜ਼ਨਸ ਵੀ ਡਾਊਨ ਜਾਣਾ ਕੰਮ ਇੱਥੇ ਘਟੂਗਾ ਫਿਰ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਲਈ ਵੀ ਔਖਾ
ਫਿਰ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਕੱਠੇ
ਰਹਿਣ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜੇ ਗੋਡੇ ਆ ਸਾਰੇ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਰਹਿਣਗੇ ਤਾਂ ਸਾਰੀ ਏਕਤਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਾਰੇ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਰਹਿਣਗੇ ਤਾਂ ਸਾਰੀਆਂ ਕੰਟਰੀਆਂ ਲਈ ਗੋਡੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਲਈ ਵੀ ਸਾਡੇ ਲਈ
ਬਿਗੇਸਟ ਕੰਸਰਨ ਕੀ ਆ Brexit ਦੇ ਨਾਲ
ਬਿਗੇਸਟ ਕੰਸਰਨ ਤਾਂ ਵੀ ਭਾਈ ਬਿਜ਼ਨਸ ਤਾਂ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਤੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਭਰਾ ਰਹਿੰਦੇ ਆ ਹੋਰ ਕੰਟਰੀਆਂ ਯੂਰਪ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਹ ਆ ਜਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਸਕਦੇ ਤੇ ਮਿਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਸਕਦੇ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਜਾਂ ਕੁਛ ਵੀ ਕਈ ਹੁਣ ਆ ਗਏ ਆਪਣਾ ਉੱਥੇ ਬਿਜ਼ਨਸ ਸਾਰਾ ਬੰਦ ਕਰਕੇ ਇੱਥੇ ਆ ਗਏ ਆ ਹੁਣ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਲਈ ਵੀ ਔਖਾ ਬਹੁਤ ਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਵੀ ਬਿਜ਼ਨਸ ਇੱਥੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਆ ਆਪਣੇ ਵੀ ਉਹਦਾ ਕੰਟਰੀਆਂ 'ਚ ਹੈਗੇ ਹੋਰਾਂ ਦੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਜਿੰਨੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਫਿਰ ਹਾਰਡ ਹੋ ਜਾਣਾ ਔਖਾ ਹੋ ਜਾਣਾ ਕੁੜੀ
Thank you. What are your main concerns about Brexit?
My main concerns are just how we end up here, really. So there's a lot of uncertainty at the moment, and I don't know really what's going to happen because there's current debate about on Tuesday the big vote in Parliament. So it depends how that works out, and then if the Conservatives get toppled, it's quite uncertain. I wanted to stay personally, but I'm going to have to see how it goes. It's just all up in the air.
Are you quite disappointed with the state of British politics as a whole at the minute?
Well, it's quite difficult to say really because I'm not that old, so I haven't seen or been into politics for quite a while. So for the majority of the time that I've been paying attention to politics, it has been like this, so I don't know much different. So I don't have anything really to compare to.
Theresa May obviously under a lot of pressure, uncertainty over whether that vote will get through on Tuesday. How do you think she has done?
It's a difficult one because I think she's stuck between a rock and a hard place at the moment. Like I think she's done okay for the positions she's in, but as for the deal itself, I think it could be better. But I don't know. There's as again with Brexit, there's too many uncertainties to have a real view on it. That's the problem.
And do you think the public want to see another general election?
I'm not sure. Again, because there's so much uncertainty again. I mean, a general election could put a new face in, new voices, but then as to what's going to happen if a new government is formed, and if it's a real government, because with the instability we might have another coalition, then it's going to be quite hard to know what's going to happen, and that's the main issue. I think it's the stability. So not sure.
And just to finish, do you think people are getting a little bit bored about all this talk about Brexit now?
Well, I mean, I'm personally getting a bit bored. I think it's controlling the news so much, and that's all we see, that it's going to affect our futures that much. It has to be part of it, but it is dragging on a lot.
Thank you.
No problems. Cheers.
And what are your overall views about Brexit at the minute?
There seems to be a lot of mixed news on Brexit, whether it's going to an extent which is going to affect the economy, but overall I don't think it's going to be good for the economy, but uncontrolled immigration perhaps necessarily isn't great either, so we'll see where we go, I guess.
Do you think...
I guess we're more concerned about what it's going to impact on people's jobs and the housing market, and whether it will tip us into a recession, I guess.
And you mentioned the economic aspect there. Is that something you are seriously concerned about if we do leave the EU?
Well, if you think if we've got borders up against Europe, we're not going to have the positive European immigrants with a good work ethic coming over. So, you know, who really generally come here to work, and they've got a stronger work ethic, so we're going to lose that. So we're going to lose lower pools of labour, which are more efficient. So I guess that's one. And then there's lots of cross-border business that may not happen to the extent that it's happening now. So I guess it's uncertainty really, that's the main thing, isn't it? But I do think we are going to have a bit of a dip after Brexit.
And obviously we've got that crucial vote in the House of Commons coming on Tuesday. But do you believe the public are getting a little bit sick and tired about all this talk of Brexit?
I guess so. We just need to get through it now, get to where we are. Theresa May's done a great job, and then ultimately your economy is down to what you do and what you're planning and how hard you're working and what your plans are and your own sort of working career. So that's ultimately what you can focus on, isn't it?
You've been surprised by Theresa May's determination and commitment, because many people would have thought she would have been long gone by now.
I think the thing is, at the end of the day, Cameron set up the Brexit as a referendum, and obviously walked away when the vote went the way he didn't expect it to. But I think she had a bit of steel about her at the outset. I could see she'd come in to actually complete this job, and to be fair to her, she's doing a great job.
And just to finish off, do you want to see an early general election?
I don't think the opposition is really there. I think we're okay with who we've got at the moment. I don't see anybody that's going to have delivered the Brexit better than her, and even within her cabinet, she's the best one, I think, at the moment.
Thanks for your time, really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Baji, ਤੁਹਾਡੇ view ਕੀ ਆ Brexit ਦਾ?
ਭਾਜੀ ਵੱਡੀ ਗੱਲ ਤਾਂ ਇਹ ਹੈ, ਸਾਡੇ ਹੁਣ ਉੱਥੇ ਹਾਲਾਤ ਖਰਾਬ ਹੋਏ ਸੀ ਥੋੜੇ ਜਿਹੇ ਕੰਮਾਂ ਦੇ ਵੀ, ਅਸੀਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਸੈੱਟ ਹੋਏ ਸੀ ਆ ਕੇ, ਕਾਫੀ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੇ ਆ ਕੇ ਮਕਾਨ ਵੀ ਖਰੀਦ ਲਏ, ਤੇ ਹੁਣ ਜਾਨੀ ਕਿ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਉੱਥੋਂ ਵਾਲੇ ਹਾਲਾਤ ਫੇਰ ਦਿਸ ਰਹੇ ਆ। ਇਹ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਠੀਕ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ, ਜਾਨੀ ਕਿ ਵੀ ਜੋਰਪਾਂ ਟੁੱਟਣਾ, ਅੱਜ ਤਾਂ ਲੋਕੀ ਵਰਲਡ ਦੇ ਲੋਕ ਤਾਂ ਇੱਕ ਹੋ ਰਹੇ ਆ, ਤੇ ਇਹ ਫਿਰ ਜੋਰਪਾਂ ਟੁੱਟ ਰਹੇ ਆ। ਤਾਂ ਜਾਨੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਲਾਈਕ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਦੇ ਇਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਵੀ ਚੀਜ਼ ਨੂੰ, ਵੀ ਹੁਣ ਇਹ ਦੋ ਫੇਰ ਇਹ ਵੱਖਰੇ ਵੱਖਰੇ ਹੋਣ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਜੇ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਹੋਣਗੇ ਤਾਂ ਹੋਰ ਵੀ ਮੈਜੋਰਟੀ ਬਣੂ, ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਕੰਮ ਉਧਰ ਚੱਲਣਗੇ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਕੰਮ ਇੱਧਰ ਆਉਣਗੇ। ਇਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਕਾਫੀ ਕਾਰੋਬਾਰ ਦਾ ਵੀ ਉਧਰੋਂ ਉਧਰ ਹੀ ਚੱਲਦਾ ਹੈਗਾ, ਪਰ ਇਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਟੁੱਟ ਕੇ ਫਿਰ ਦੇਸ਼ ਦਾ ਉਹੀ ਹਾਲ ਹੋ ਜਾਣਾ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਵਾਲੇ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਠੀਕ ਨਹੀਂ ਇਹ ਚੀਜ਼।
ਤੇਰੇ ਬਿਗੇਸਟ ਕੰਸਰਨ ਕੀ ਆ ਜੇ Brexit ਹੁੰਦਾ?
ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਣਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਵੱਖਰਾ।
ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਯੂਰਪ ਤੋਂ ਆਇਆ, ਉੱਥੇ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਸੀ?
ਯੂਰਪ ਵੀ ਠੀਕ ਹੈਗਾ, ਸਾਨੂੰ ਸਿਰਫ ਕੰਮ ਦੀ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਸੀ, ਕੰਮਾਂ ਕਰਕੇ ਇੱਥੇ ਆਏ ਸੀਗੇ, ਕਾਫੀ ਹੱਦ ਤੱਕ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਪੜ੍ਹਾਈਆਂ ਦਾ ਕਰਕੇ ਆ ਗਏ, ਇੱਧਰ ਨੂੰ ਕਾਫੀ ਕੰਮ ਦਾ ਕਰਕੇ ਆਏ, ਪਰ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਠੀਕ ਨਹੀਂ ਗਾ। ਹੁਣ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਫਿਰ ਕੰਮ ਦੀ ਯਾਨੀ ਕਿ ਕੰਡੀਸ਼ਨ ਇੰਨੀ ਟਾਈਟ ਹੈਗੀ ਉੱਥੇ, ਹੁਣ ਫਿਰ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਹੋਰ ਕੰਟਰੀ ਲੱਭਣੀ ਪੈਣੀ ਆ ਕੋਈ ਯੂਰਪ ਦੀ, ਇਹਦਾ ਠੀਕ ਨਹੀਂ। ਅਸੀਂ ਮੈਂ ਯਾਨੀ ਕਿ ਇੱਥੇ ਆ ਕੇ ਖੁਸ਼ ਹਾਂ, ਹੈਪੀ ਹਾਂ, ਹੁਣ ਘਰ ਲਈ ਤੇ ਸਾਰਾ ਕੁਝ ਸੈਟਿੰਗ ਕੀਤੀ ਆਪਾਂ, ਤੇ ਜੇ ਹੁਣ ਕੱਲ੍ਹ ਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਵੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਜਾਓ ਨਾ, ਸਾਨੂੰ ਹਜੇ ਇਹ ਪਤਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਵੀ ਉਹ ਘਰਾਂ ਦਾ ਕੀ ਬਣਨਾ ਕੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਬਣਨਾ, ਅਸੀਂ ਇਸ ਚੀਜ਼ ਨਾਲ ਖੁਸ਼ ਨਹੀਂ ਜਾਂਦੇ।
Thank you.
ਖਾਲਸਾ।
Some really interesting views put forward there. But now attention turns to Tuesday and that crunch vote in the House of Commons. Will Theresa May get her deal through Parliament? And Randeep, I know you've been campaigning for Remain as well, based on Sikh principles. Can you just outline your reasons for that?
I think it's mainly because social justice is a really important part of who I am. And when something that important is being challenged, then it's only right to stand up and kind of make your voice heard rather than do nothing. And to be clear, kind of, and I really believe that Brexit will kind of diminish and weaken our powers to kind of create a more socially just society.
Yeah.
I think that not just in our towns, our cities, our country, but in the world as well. If that's kind of combating the inequality and the poverty that I've spoken about, to kind of creating a society where it doesn't matter where you're from, you have equal opportunity and equal access to well-being and opportunity. That's really important. And Brexit diminishes that to a level where we're weaker and poorer to make any kind of impact in those areas. And just before your break, I think you mentioned those three things that Brexit is kind of always talk about, taking control of our borders. I completely agree that we should have a immigration policy where it's more equal, but that's completely in the hands of the current government.
Yeah.
If they wanted to, they can change the visa to third countries overnight if they wanted to. Taking control of our money, completely understand that. And the issue that I have with that is that the government hasn't been upfront with the public as to where that money goes. So to be clear, we have control of 98% of our budget.
Yeah.
Only 2% of our budget goes to the EU. And even that comes back either as a rebate, so we get a refund, and the other way it comes back, as you know, there's a website called myeu.co.uk. If you go to it, you can type your postcode in, and it will tell you all the EU projects that have been, all the projects that have been in your community have been funded by the EU. So kind of in Wales, and the irony is all the places which voted leave, they're the ones who receive the most amount of funding, hospitals, local youth clubs. So I take issue with that because we still get control 98% of our budget, and it's up to this government how they spend that. And we talked about austerity already and the kind of cuts that were unnecessary because we haven't reached the same kind of budget commitments that we're told now they've been pushed into the 2020s. And the third point about the laws. If we look at the laws, we have to understand, okay, we're part of a global international community. There has to be standards. There has to be kind of aware of, okay, we're on a level playing field. And there's loads of work being done in this area with the tax havens and stuff like that. All of them are changing their rules. They want to kind of become better, international citizens. And so there has to be across kind of a global kind of set of standards, and we have to take those laws into our legal system. But it's also important to tell people that actually we're represented. The UK is represented when these when these laws are debated in Parliament. When the European Commission brings them forward, we have representation there as well. To say that, we just take them willy-nilly and kind of not even think about them, it's a gross misjust to kind of our arrangement with the EU, which allows us to veto literally everything that comes through alongside France and Germany. And I'll take this. I'll make it a bit kind of more light-hearted. So the bendy banana that was kind of pushed by Boris, he said, the EU wants us to have bendy bananas. We can't have straight bananas. What's that all about? That's not even an EU law. It's come from the WTO. So WTO, which is where Brexiteers want us to go to, is where the EU gets most of these regulations from anyway, because the EU as a bloc is part of WTO. So this fantasy about we're going to have completely like a lot more relaxed kind of rules about regulation stuff outside in WTO, it doesn't make sense. So those are the kind of three things I wanted to kind of touch on, because I think I completely agree that those are really important to anyone. Even in our kind of, we want control over our pay. We don't want our kind of employer to say, oh, well, I'm going to give 10% of your pay to X, Y, Z. We want to have a say in that. But my point is that as part of the EU, we do have a say in that. And we're part of a collective where we pool resources. So if someone's poorer, and this is a Sikh kind of Gurmat angle to this as well, if someone's poorer, if a nation needs help, we pool into a centre budget, and that budget gets shared out. We don't get as much of that budget back because another country needs it more than us. Why as a Sikh do I have an issue with that? I don't. And why do I have an issue with kind of standing with other nations and calling out, hostile regimes around the world or humanitarian crisis, helping them out? Why do I have an issue with kind of that budget being spent in other countries where trying to help people with humanitarian crisis and all that sort of stuff? So I think there's a lot to kind of, I think that the issue is, I think Harsimrat will agree, is that there's not much transparency or kind of much information about where does that money go to. Whereas we kind of understand, so, the government wants to spend X amount here, wants to put that much money into that social care, so we kind of understand a bit more. But with the EU, it's failure on our side as well to kind of educate ourselves a bit more.
Harsimrat, do you believe religion should stay out of the Brexit debate, or do you acknowledge some of the arguments that have been put forward by Randeep there?
I think religion and politics is a really interesting debate. The way I've always seen it is Sikhi is above politics. It's above Labour, Conservative, it's above Brexit and Remain. And actually, even the examples that you gave regarding social reform and standing with fellow countries, we can still do that outside of the European Union. You know, if there's an issue, just like last week, I can't remember the country now, but Theresa May basically spoke to, was it the Iranian Prime Minister or the Turkish Prime Minister, and basically said there's a lady who's basically being tortured, that needs to stop, and you need to raise awareness of that. That is the kind of things I want to see from our government, regardless of who's in power, right? That is what I want to see going forward for Great Britain as well. It's like how many things are happening in India, in Pakistan, in Eastern Asia that no one is saying anything about. We need a government strong enough to say something about that. So regardless of whether we're in or out of Europe, that still lies with our government to have, I guess, the guts to do something about that.
Yeah, I think you're completely right with that the government should stand up. I don't know, I think it's more powerful if you're part of something, part of a group of members who unanimously kind of come out and say, what you're doing to the nation, that's wrong. And I kind of particularly take an issue with this idea that Great Britain is going to be kind of more flamboyant or more kind of, you know, steadfast in its kind of telling other nations off, because we know that's not the case. So
that's kind of not what I said. What I said is that we can still do it if we want. If we agree with a stance, we can say to Europe, you know what, we'll sign the letter as well. There's no issue with that. We can say that to America, we say that to any country right around the world right now. What I have an issue with is when there's things that we don't agree with and it's a majority rules, we still have to go with it. Just like with the laws, there are certain laws that come from the European Union that we have vetoed. But because we were outvoted, we still have to implement
no, a veto means that it doesn't get passed. So we have a veto where it doesn't matter if they're outvoted. So we have to kind of distinguish between the European Commission and then the Parliament. In Parliament, obviously, just like any other Parliament in the world, the majority, whichever side the majority is on, that gets passed, which is how representative democracy works. But with the European Commission, we do have a veto as a nation to say no. And there's stuff around taxes, especially, we've kind of vetoed quite a lot when it comes to kind of the EU wanted to kind of press ahead and kind of remove all these harmful tax practices, but the UK said no. The EU, had issue with us reducing our corporation tax rate. Well, that's, we're getting into technicalities, but we still did it because we have that kind of power. So veto means that doesn't matter what other nations say in the European Commission, we can say we're not having that, and it doesn't happen.
And the Brexit situation obviously changing every single day, but the People's Vote campaign certainly gaining a lot of momentum. Did we not have a People's Vote in 2016, Randeep?
We did have a People's Vote, but the will of the people had changed. So I don't know if you saw the poll, like, is it 3 days ago, by YouGov. They polled 29,000 people, which as a mathematician and as a kind of politician, you would know that's quite a lot of people. And they found that 600 constituencies now back Remain, 30 constituencies back May's deal, and 2 constituencies back a no-deal Brexit. And it follows on. So my point is that public opinion changes, and to say tyrants say, "Oh, the will of the people," without kind of assessing, is that still the case? So my only concern is that when people say the will of the people, when we start saying that's fixed and it's kind of fixed in time, that's what kind of tyrants do, and that's not the kind of democracy we live in. We have, if the will of the people kind of is the idea that we take forward as a fixed thing, then why do we have elections? Why do you have election, 2 years after 2015? The will of the people changed then. We didn't get a majority Conservative Party. And so I think the momentum's moving because people are much more educated as to what's going on. 2 years ago, actually 5 months ago, we didn't know what the deal was going to be. We still don't really know if it's going to get through because it has to get past European Parliament as well. So I think a lot of people are more educated now and they kind of understand. So this kind of, when I talk about austerity and stuff like that, it's such a fundamental component of the Brexit vote. LSE did this report where they've kind of linked the people who were most hit by austerity is where the UKIP's vote went up. And that's the same, those are the same constituencies they found now that are changing their mind on Brexit. So it wasn't immigration, it wasn't kind of bring back the laws. It was actually, how am I economically well off or not? I think that's the kind of center point for everyone. And they found that there's a strong correlation to the UKIP vote, and then now it's the strong relationship between them changing, those constituents changing their minds to remain now, just because of the kind of the economic, the assessment that we have from the government itself.
Harsimrat, I take it you might have some different feelings than Randeep put forward there.
I think Michael Gove once says we're fed up of experts, and I'm going to say we're fed up of polls. Every poll the last 3-4 elections have been entirely wrong. So when someone says to me, the polls say, I'm like, which polls? Because everyone has been wrong. The last 3 elections, and you can ask any one of my friends, I've called every election right. And it's been entirely opposite to the poll. I called the hung parliament, I called the Brexit debate, as I said it was going to be close, but we'll win it. And I called the fact that David Cameron would obviously win the last election as well. And no one else was seeing that. And it's if you actually dig into the numbers, and this is why I don't like polls, because it generalizes too much, and it doesn't basically look at the trends over time. And being a mathematician, I love numbers and I can do this. And you've got to be really careful when you say the polls say. Actually, let's go talk to people ourselves. Let's not rely on what's happening with the media, and I'm not going to take a fight with the media either. But go and talk to people, whether it's at the Gurdwara, whether it's at work, whether it's in your social gatherings, whatever you do outside of work, in your volunteering activities, and literally sit down with people and ask, what do you feel? How are you feeling?
No,
how can we change? And I think we always put the power in politicians' hands. And yes, they probably have a majority of the power because they can change the big decisions. But when it's small things like where is our taxes going, or where is our money going, or a local community project, or education, or a school, actually, why aren't we as a community, and when I say community, I don't just necessarily mean Sikhs, I mean as a group of people living together, why don't we get together and do something about it? In one of the other answers...
That's why we're asking for our people's vote. Take the power from the politicians.
Okay, I'll come on to the people's vote in a minute. But like you said a minute ago that the auntie and uncles came to the polling station and said which one's Labour, because they were uneducated. Well, actually, what I did during both the general election and the Brexit referendum is I brought the Labour, the Conservative, the Lib Dem candidates to the Gurdwara, and I said, you can have 5 minutes on stage, we're going to ask you the exact same question, so none of this pre-prepared speeches. I'm going to ask you the same questions, you're going to give the same answer to the Sangat. And then we wrote it up and we left it in the Gurdwara Sahib. So then people had that opportunity to say, okay, these are the questions that are important to us, because I sat down with the committee and the Sangat and said, what do you want to know about? And we had the answers written there in black and white.
Brilliant idea. Rather than giving them stage time, just put them in the Langar hall in front of Sangat and say, all right, you can ask your questions. What do you think about crime?
Even if you do it on stage, just ask them straight there. Say, okay, this is the questions from the Sangat, you have 5 minutes and these are the questions. Don't give them the questions beforehand.
No.
These are politicians, they should know it like that. So when you say actually people weren't engaged or didn't know what they were voting for, well, we're at fault then.
Well, that's what I mentioned. I said it's our own fault that we didn't educate. We were kind of living in this kind of, oh, well, that's a faraway place and we're not really kind of concerned with it. We'll just go on doing our own stuff. And when it came to it, it's like, all right, which one's Labour? Then it's kind of scrambling for answers. It's not right. But on the polling, I have to take issue because 29,000 people is a lot of people. Normally, polls are like 2,000, 3,000 people. It takes a lot of money to kind of poll 29,000 people.
I do polls every day in my job.
And they do regression. So these guys use this kind of, you probably have a better idea. They use techniques that were used to accurately predict Trump's win. And the hung parliament last time round. So
YouGov didn't predict the hung parliament last time round.
No, the technique that they've used.
The technique, this is the problem with maths. To put it kind of in an easy way, when you look at an individual, you don't look at the whole circumstances. You don't look at the trend over time in terms of how they've changed either party, how they've changed their vote, how they've changed their lifestyle, their job, their family, their circumstances.
But the way this works, the way this works is that they poll the 29,000 people, then they add loads of data sets to them. So they do look at that kind of, where do they live? what the circumstances.
But they didn't generalize too much. And I can guarantee you that if we did this poll again in 2 weeks' time, they would get an entirely different result.
I want to say, if Brexit doesn't go ahead, if it doesn't take place, there's going to be a lot of angry people across the nation. What do you believe is the biggest risk that we as a country face if Brexit doesn't take place?
I think Brexit will take place. We will leave the European Union. It's a matter of how and with what deal. I think it's as simple as that. Brexit will happen. We will leave the European Union, but it's what state. In terms of the risk that we face as a country, I think the biggest risk will be probably calmness in the country and people feeling actually something that they're proud of. Right now, people don't know where they stand. They know that they want Brexit, or they know that they don't, but then they don't know how to implement that. And it's all in the politicians' hands. And the one thing that I 100% disagreed with from day one is the Brexit team and Vote Leave, and including Remain actually, was a cross-party kind of movement.
Yeah.
The Brexit team, we had Gisela Stewart from Labour, you had Boris Johnson, Michael Gove from the Conservative. On Remain, again, you had Ruth Davidson, for example, from the Conservative, and then you had a lot of Labour people, which I can't remember the names of now. Actually, when we decided that Brexit had won, there was now a vacuum of that cross-party getting together and doing something about it. And what I think we should have happened is the government should have said, you know what, let's have a cross-party group, a cross-party committee that takes this forward. Because then it's the people who voted for it and wanted it and drove it forward and had the right ideas are at the right table. Right now we have a Prime Minister who isn't strong enough in herself. She wasn't strong enough as Home Secretary. She's not strong enough as Prime Minister. And also she voted Remain. She doesn't fundamentally believe, like she's a Eurosceptic, she doesn't like Europe, but she voted Remain. So she doesn't fundamentally believe in the project and in the vision. So I don't trust her to take it forward. And neither does a lot of the country.
And if Brexit does take place, do you think there's a fear of hate crime continuing to increase and communities actually becoming more isolated?
I think there's a real danger of that, because if we don't solve the kind of issues that kind of are raised already, that kind of underlined the kind of how and why people voted Brexit. After Brexit and we leave the European Union, those issues aren't solved. They're still going to be there. So people are still feeling like they're isolated. They can't kind of have the same opportunity as someone who lives in London or the Southeast. They're still going to feel angry, and they're still going to be left behind. And they're going to kind of lash out even more to say, and if they see a Sikh walking around the road, they see a Muslim walking down the road, or they'll see a Polish shop, they're going to feel that same anger, because they're going to say, I voted a certain way, the government fudged it up, but we kind of got there somehow, which I don't believe we will. But then kind of say, I'm still poorer. I'm still kind of having to go to a food bank. I'm still having to work 3 jobs. I don't get to see my children, but I'm still having to visit a food bank. I can't afford my child's primary school or secondary school uniform. I'm still kind of got nothing to save. I'm still having to kind of count the pennies to fill my to put the meter on. They're going to feel angry still. So if we don't, so regardless of what happens, I think the government really needs to look at the underlying issues in this country, because we're a massive kind of, it's a tale of 2 sides basically, this country, and we definitely need to go to the bottom of that.
Just to find...
Can I, just pause on that. So 2 points. Firstly, I disagree with the question. I don't think hate crime has increased. Actually, what has happened is because people are talking more about hate crimes, it has become more okay and normal to report it.
I think the reporting measures have improved
increased.
as well,
And but also you've got to look at, so LSE, you know, you mentioned it for another report, but LSE did a big report on hate crime versus Brexit versus a general election. And what they saw was the report numbers had gone up because it became okay to report, and it wasn't a taboo subject as if you became a victim. But also the hate crimes does not include hate crimes against white individuals. So that's basically a misjudgment in the figures already. The figures are biased. The second thing is what VG you mentioned in terms of the underlying problems of the country. 100% agree with you. The government is too focused on Brexit. They have forgotten the rest of the issues that we are facing as individuals. Whether it's poverty, whether it's being kind of hard strapped at work, whether it's the education failing our children, whatever it might be, the government needs to pull up their socks and do something about it.
But even prior to the Brexit debate, since 2010, so the UN's report is all about austerity, and it started in 2010. There was nothing. The Brexit wasn't even on the agenda apart from like five Tory, and UKIPers. So it's a kind of it didn't happen overnight. It's taken years and years, and kind of I understand the kind of the fallout after the credit crunch. We had to kind of be a bit more conservative as to how we spend our money, but it's about being intelligent. So not cutting taxes for corporations, but then cutting kind of £200 from someone's credits. And your issue around hate crime has gone up. Okay, I understand what you're saying, which is people are more okay to kind of, it has gone up. Statistics. The police watchdog have come out and said they expect a spike after the 29th of March in hate crime. They just expect it to happen now, which is is really concerning. No matter how the numbers of who's going to be who those hate crimes are going to be committed against, and they found that, although I completely understand people are reporting them more, but the fascinating part is 70% of the increase. I think in 2016, 17, there's like 80,000 hate crimes registered. 70% of those were religion related, faith related. So we've got to be, as a community ourselves, and kind of a community that looks after other communities, we've got to be a bit more okay, so we're expecting this kind of spike. The police are gearing up for it. As a community, what can we do about that? And so I think there is lessons to be learned about. I completely understand your point. People are more willing to do it, register the hate crimes.
I think because we're also talking about it more, it's kind of like a serial crime. Look at what happened in America with the gun crime. You started talking about the gun debate, and then people, when they wanted to commit a crime, they went to guns, because that was like in mainstream media. They were like, I want to do something stupid, let me go pick up a gun and do something about it. Then that got more attraction, and it happened over and over again. And it's the same thing that happened here. The UKIP party started talking about racial or immigrants, which then was misconstrued in terms of, I guess, the color of your skin. And then because of that, when people wanted to be stupid and wanted to commit a crime, they would go to racial crime. And it wasn't, I still think hate crime is the wrong word, it was racial crime. They basically picked on who they thought was the most vulnerable in society. And that's the other thing about these kinds of things being discussed in the media. I'm not saying they shouldn't be discussed, but they need to be more balanced. If we're going to bring up people who are black and brown and coloured to basically talk about what they've felt, let's also bring up people who are white.
Yeah, but I think your gun example is a bad example, I think, because here we had a trigger, which was the vote. And so
the hate crimes was before that.
No, but I completely understand. But my point is that there was a trigger. So there's a point in time where we can say, prior to this, what was the level? What kind of hate crime was it? From June 2016, what kind of hate crime was it? And how many polls were attacked before 2016? I would guess. I'm not. I haven't done any analysis of it. I would guess it'd be far less than it was after June 2016. And even in my area, these polo shops are vandalized incredibly. There's news articles about people going to see the doctor who's a European nurse, and they say, "Oh, what are you still doing here?" Stuff like that. So you can there's a trigger. So gun crime, I completely understand, because social media is kind of promoted to the kind of world scene to say, hey, this is not okay. But I agree, gun crimes have been happening in the US since the dawn of time. But here we have a trigger point, which is June 2016. Since then, there's been a massive spike. People are probably feeling a bit more I need to report it now rather than before. But there's specific kind of crime which basically relates to the vote, which is go back to your country, we voted out, what are you still doing here?
But that wasn't the main rhetoric of the debate or the campaign. That was a small
Look at the posters.
section.
Look at the posters.
That wasn't the mainstream. So if you look at what the mainstream media was talking about, that wasn't. It was always about fair immigration. There was a small angle of people, and I agree, social media took that to an extreme.
Harsimrat,
that had an
we
echo
had
chamber.
senior Tory politicians standing outside. They were promoting. So Priti Patel came to Bangladeshi curry houses. Yeah, I think it's even done. I think one of them came to the Sikh Gurdwara. They talked about, oh, you can't bring your grandmother over because of to your wedding because of these kind of visa, which is their own fault really. But look, all these people, they can bring the kids over, they can bring the grandmothers over. There was that rhetoric, which is that you're losing out because of them. and is that kind of fueled it. So afterwards, it was
Yeah,
plain
but
to see
that
that
doesn't
that
go
was the
back to
reason.
hate crime. That goes back to the fair immigration, because it was Europe versus outside of the
Yeah,
world.
if there's a debate that needs to happen, it needs to happen around a table, not vandalising someone's shop.
That
Agreed.
is
That
unfortunately
I
all we've got time for. We could probably go on for another 5-6 hours. Brexit is the never-ending debate. It's been fantastic to have you both here. We really do appreciate your time. And thank you all for watching. Join us next week for the Politics Show.